Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today to our online ConnecTALKS Workshop, Exploring Purpose for Greater Connections with Scotty Johnson. It's really great to see, gosh, even more people are joining. Got very popular workshop, Scotty, so get ready. Yeah. So it's really great to see so many of you logged on. It is now 2 o'clock, so I'm going to kick this off. I wanted to briefly share a little bit about our host today, Scotty. Scotty is the founder of Explore What Matters, a company which aims to support and inspire businesses to create the sustainable, life-changing habits that will make a positive difference to people, workplaces, society, and the planets that we live on. So he's got over 20 years experience in creating purpose-driven experiences for senior executive. Scotty, for those of you who don't know him, has worked for and on behalf of leading brands such as Bvlgari, Pernod Ricard, Lendlease and Sky, as well as Bahraini Royal Family. So some examples of his work include wellbeing programs in the rainforests of Australia, executive offsites in national parks, and leadership retreats in the Arctic. So really exciting background. Scotty will help us deal with adversity and how we can use kindness, empathy, and connections to help us through these challenging times and beyond. Expect this session in true Connections Way style to be incredibly interactive. We will be using Zoom to its full potential with breakout virtual rooms for smaller and more intimate group discussions, which I'm really looking forward to. Each day we're continuing to learn how to adapt to this new normal, and we are striving to offer our community a space to collaborate, seek reassurance, and continue to support each other. We want to provide our community and the industry with a space to collaborate, seek reassurance, support each other, as well to play our part in the recovery and resurgence of our industry, which is a process that I always say this, and I have every confidence will begin in the not too distant future. So we hope this session will be a welcome insight into the crisis management and into you managing this crisis to the best of your ability by looking at what purpose means, and provide a fresh perspective and help you navigate in this situation. So before I hand over to Scotty, I wanted to let you know how this works and what to expect. I've already said it's a very interactive session. Scotty will be presenting to us, and then we will use these breakout rooms to make us all think in a smaller way, in a smaller group. And at the end, Scotty will open this to questions. So please do not hold back. I'm sure many of you used Zoom before. If you want to ask a question at any time, if you hover down on the bottom of your screen, there is a chat box button that you can press and ask questions. If you can't find the chat box, you can actually click on the more with the 3 dots and then click on chat. You can decide to share your question with everybody or just with the co-hosts, or just directed it to the host, although Scotty is quite busy actually running all of this. So I suggest that if you have a question, you direct it either to me, or we have 4 more members of the Connections team: David Benitez, Gemma Fitchett, Greg Reeves, and Alex Roca. So these guys are there. If you don't want to ask it to everyone, if you don't want your question to be shown to everyone, you can direct it to any one of us, and we'll make sure we field as many questions as we possibly can. This session, and I do encourage you to ask as many questions, by the way, because it has to be interactive. We all have to, and we all can play our part. This session will last up to 1 hour and 15 minutes and is being recorded. So if you have any colleagues or friends that might actually find this webinar useful, then you can always forward the recording to them. Finally, please be respectful and understanding of one another. We encourage you to have a positive, supportive spirit in these challenging times. Between us all, there is so much wealth of knowledge, insight, and advice that can be shared to help guide us through these uncertain times. So let's use each other for the good of our industry. So thank you, everyone. Scotty, now it's over to you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Michaela. Now, hopefully you should be able to see that holding slide. Hi, everyone. It's yeah, it's great to see so many of you on the call, and it might be a good evening or a good morning or good afternoon wherever you are in the world. So as Michaela said, I'm sure many of you are now familiar with Zoom, and perhaps some of you are experiencing a bit of Zoom fatigue even. So we'll try and make this particular Zoom session interactive, enjoyable, and insightful. That is my aim, to help you during these curious times that we're in. I noticed that some of you have got your video on, and some of you haven't. And I think a lot of the times with a webinar, people are used to not having their video on. But if you feel comfortable having your video on, it would really help with this session in terms of you seeing each other and being connected and being part of the objectives of what this particular workshop is about. So please, if you're being comfortable to put your video on, please do. It doesn't matter if you're still in your pajamas, and hopefully not if it's 8 p.m. wherever you are. That's absolutely fine. If you've got animals running around, children in the background, absolutely fine. There's a very curious thing that this situation has brought on us in terms of our connection with people. Is, you know, when we go to work, we you know, we have a persona, and we often pretend to be something we maybe might not be. And one of the things that this has done is allow us to see into people's real lives. And you know, it wasn't long ago there was an article on the BBC News, and it made headline news because a guy who was being interviewed about something, and his daughter, one of his children, appeared. And then his wife ran in to pick up the daughter, and it made headline news that this guy actually had a real life, and he wasn't this polished professional executive that he should have been on the BBC News. So I think it's actually great, because in terms of leadership specifically, we're actually seeing people as real humans, as real people in their homes with their family and children and animals. And I actually think it's no bad thing in terms of one of the benefits or the opportunities that will come from this. So please feel free to put your video on. You will not be judged, and that would be great. One little technical thing is with the slides, you should, in terms of your view options, one of the best views to use for this is the side-by-side view, where you'll get the slides and then the people at the side of the screen. So please use the side-by-side view. In terms of what I'm going to cover, you know, it's a huge subject, what we're in right now in terms of adversity, connection, purpose, and I'm sure you'll have some questions and needs. So as Michaela said, please feel free to fire away with the questions in the chat box. And at the end of this, my aim is to give you a few pragmatic things that you can actually be doing during this time. Okay, so in terms of this being interactive and helping you connect, I would like you to open up the chat box, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's just either at the bottom or the top of your screen, depending on what system you're using. And in the chat box, could you just put your name in the chat box and tell us where in the world you are right now? So write in the chat box, and let's just see where we've got people and who you are. So feel free. Hi, Patricia, Mumbai, lovely in London. Oh, they're flying through. I can't read that quick. Excellent.
Spain, Richmond,
hi, Barbara.
Bye.
Iceland.
Oh, hello, Asta. Spain.
Hi, Nisha. I just saw Nisha. Sao Paulo, Brazil, Germany. Fantastic. Well, that's a great. So we got people all over the, yeah, in the US as well, Switzerland, Spain. Fantastic. Okay, so a whole range of people from all over. Sam, hi Sam, in LA. Hopefully Sam's not still in his pajamas. Maybe he's got dressed. Portugal, great. Okay, so that's great. Well, thanks for sharing where you are. Yes, Sam says yes, pajamas. Excellent. That's good. I can't actually see everybody's videos if they are on, so I don't know if Sam's sporting his best Winnie the Pooh pajamas there. I don't know. Okay, so in terms of this whole idea of connection and exploring this idea of connection, the last piece of work I did with a client face to face before we got into this situation was a couple of workshops that I did with some different clients, but the last one was it was something I developed called Being Human, and I called it the art of connection, because I've always been fascinated with this idea of how we connect. I'm quite a sociable person, so this lockdown for me is quite challenging. I like being face to face with people, and most of my career has been working face to face with clients and spending lots of time outdoors with people. So I'm finding some of this quite challenging myself. So the last piece of work I did was called The Art of Connection. And one of the things that came from that was one of the clients I did this with said at the end of it, they were far more aware, and they noticed the power of smiling and how we connect with people when we smile. It's one of the most basic ways that we connect. It's one of those things that when you look at somebody else and you smile, we are entering that place of judgment. Is it friend or foe? Do I feel threatened? Is this a safe place or not? So smiling is an incredible thing. Apparently we can use up to 59 muscles when we smile at somebody. And the client I worked with said that afterwards we'd been talking about this basic thing of how you connect with people at the most basic level in terms of smiling, and that they'd noticed as they were smiling that people would smile back. It's very difficult not to smile back at somebody when they smile at you. It's just one of those really interesting human interactions. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I'd like you to also put this in the chat box. I'd like you to think about something that has made you smile in the last day or two. So something that's made you smile in the last day or two, what has it been? And pop it in the chat box there. What has made you smile in the last day or two? Nice bird songs, absolutely, yeah. Bird songs, fantastic. Certainly in the UK at the moment, in the spring, a great song. The simplicity of playing games with your children, yeah. A new puppy, that's a good one, yeah. Flowers. Oh, no pollution in the sky in Sao Paulo, yeah. I bet that's a great one, a reason to smile. Finally completing a Where's Wally puzzle, Gemma, thank you. Drinking wine with the family, yeah, I'm sure there's been a little bit of that going on during the last few weeks. Helping someone in need who was hungry, yeah. Clear waters, children getting on, yeah. Downloading TikTok, yeah. I've still not really understood what TikTok is. I'm not there yet. Don't know what that is. Well, I kind of know what it is, but I haven't used it. Okay, so there's loads of things in there. Oh, there's another alcohol theme there. Someone drinking whiskey in Lima with your siblings. That's great. Learning so much, yeah. Lots of people have been saying that. There's been lots of learning going on, and that can be really good. Enjoying the sunshine, yeah. So loads of reasons to smile. And the reason I've started with this, to talk about this, is because it is the most basic thing. One of the things I've noticed is even going to the supermarket is the situation that we're in is generating levels of anxiety, understandably, and with anxiety there is fear. And so one of the first things we do is we close down, we become very insular, and we walk around, and we're not as, certainly I've noticed people not interacting as much as they normally do. Where I live in the north of England, we are fairly well known for being very sociable and chatty, and strangers talk to strangers a lot. But even in the supermarket here, people have, you know, people have got their heads down, and there's you know, people have looks on their faces, and I've been purposefully going around just saying hi to people and smiling. As far as I'm aware, you can't transmit or catch coronavirus from smiling at somebody. So it's just one of your things to think about in terms of your own engagement, your own connection with people. Just thinking about, you know, how aware are you of how you are carrying yourself in terms of your interaction? Because when you smile at somebody, you know, it can make them feel better. It can make them feel slightly more disarmed, maybe less threatened with the whole situation. So I would say don't underestimate the power of a basic smile when it comes to your interactions. There's loads of research about smiling, boosting the immune system and your mood. So in terms of being in the best shape through this situation, then yeah, don't underestimate the power of a smile. Okay, this over here. I don't know why I've got a yellow line on there. Okay, maybe somebody's drawing on the slides. I don't know. Okay, so in terms of smiling, one of the projects I've been doing is I'm lucky enough to travel a bit with my work. One of the things I do is I go around and I ask somebody, say, can I take your photograph? And I'm going to ask you a question just as I take the photograph. And the question is, what makes you smile? Think about something that makes you smile, and then I take a photograph. And this is the last one I did before the lockdown. This is a guy called Tony, and he's a yacht mechanic in Antigua. I was there in January, and it was the last foreign trip I ran this year before the lockdown. And it's just brilliant. And I asked him afterwards, I said, Tony, what were you thinking about? And he said, I was just thinking how proud I am of my grandchildren. And it's just a great thing to do, just to ask that question in terms of, you know, what makes you smile? What are you, you know, how are you connecting through the power of a smile? So in terms of the topic of connection, there's probably never been, certainly in my living memory, a bigger need for us to feel connected. There's high uncertainty, and you know, and that generates you know, stress and anxiety. But connection can be a huge part of how we, you know, how that can help. There's also opportunity in here, as you know, as people have already said, with some of the chat in terms of learning and connecting in different ways with people. So there's a few different areas within connection. If you're really interested in the topic of connection, then there's a great book by a guy called Johan Hari called Lost Connections, and he has done this whole research piece about how connection influences our well-being and our mental health. And it's an absolutely fascinating book of his own story, and I'm sure some of you have probably read it. Johan Hari, Lost Connections, it's called. And some of these are my own experiences, and some of this is also in his book, is thinking about how we connect with ourselves. We often think about connection as this thing with other people, but a big part of this is how we connect with ourselves in terms of, are we happy with ourselves? Are we connected to our values and our own personal purpose? And we'll explore a little bit of that. There's how we connect with other people, and that one's fairly obvious and self-explanatory. There's how we connect with our workplaces, and that can be quite a challenge at the moment. You know, most people probably aren't in their workplaces. I know a lot of people who are in the healthcare business or healthcare industries are certainly going to work, and some essential services are in work, but probably the majority of people are not in their normal workplace. So our connection with work has been disrupted, and there's some questions about how we connect with our work and how we feel having a sense of meaning and attachment to our work. And I'm sure lots of people are experiencing some questions around that. Connection with nature. And that's a huge thing at the moment, I think. Certainly in the UK, the government have said from the beginning that they're really encouraging people to get outside and exercise, because they know the importance of exercise outside, and especially when you're connecting with nature and what that does for our well-being. And then the wider world. And there may be some very big questions at the moment with this in terms of, you know, how are we connecting with the wider world? And this very much links to purpose, because having a sense of purpose is definitely directly related to our relationship with all of these things, in terms of that question about what's our place, what am I doing, why am I doing it? And I'm sure many people will be exploring some of those questions in terms of maybe feeling not very grounded, perhaps. And to be completely transparent, you know, I'm in the same place. I'm doing this talk I'll probably watch the talk back and take part as a participant, because, you know, my work is probably no different to many of you in terms of working with clients and the uncertainty about what will come. So I'm certainly personally not immune to any of this, and it's actually been quite useful preparing this talk in terms of making myself think. So in terms of current reality, this is a photograph of where I live. Well, I don't live on this road with the animals here, but this is very close to where I live, and I was out cycling a few days ago, and this is a fairly typical scene in the north of England in the Lake District, a beautiful part of the country where I live. And I came around a corner on my bicycle and I was confronted with the sight of the sheep, and there was no farmers, I couldn't see anybody, there was just loads of sheep in the middle of the road. And it made me think a little bit in terms of what's it like at the moment, in terms of analogy of, you know, where are we going? What direction are we heading in? Who's in charge? Is there any leadership? And all these questions started coming to me as I'm there on my bicycle in front of these sheep, and they're all wandering around randomly. And I thought, this is actually a little bit what it feels like in terms of the current reality. And I think in terms of being connected to more awareness around our current reality is a really, I think it's a really fundamental thing in terms of what's actually happening for people at the moment. Certainly some of the other calls I've been on, both with Connections and some other, some other groups, there's lots of questions about speculating about the future, like what's going to happen, how am I going to be in the future, how am I going to fit into it, am I going to have a livelihood? You know, all of those questions are really, really valid, but they're all very, very difficult to answer. But what we can do is we can really connect and help each other by exploring people's current reality. And there's some real benefits from it, which I'll go through shortly. So in terms of our current reality, what I'd like to do is to give you an opportunity to perhaps meet some new people and literally do nothing but check in with people's current reality. And this is one of the most powerful things you can do in terms of developing connection and developing relationships, which I think is a really important thing at the moment. So we're going to split you into breakout groups. It would be great if you have your video on. You'll certainly need your audio on for having some conversations. And I'm going to give you a couple of very simple questions. And this is to help you connect, meet some new people, and perhaps discover something a little bit about yourself and some other people. So here are the questions. In small breakout groups, you're going to be in groups of 5 or 6 people. We're going to give you about 3 minutes per person to have a conversation. So I think up to 15 minutes, and the Connections team will keep an eye through the chat in terms of how people are getting on, in terms of if they need less time, and then we can close the breakout conversations earlier. So in your small breakout groups, I'd like to give you the opportunity, as comfortable as you feel sharing, what are you experiencing at the moment? What are you noticing in yourself? And really, this is an opportunity to share just your thoughts and feelings about what's going on for you. What are you experiencing? What are you noticing in yourself? So this isn't a conversation about the future, about solutions, about other people. This is purely an opportunity for you to connect with some people about your current reality. It's quite straightforward, quite simple. Okay.
So a few minutes each, yeah? A couple of minutes per person, no more. So if it's groups of 5, then we'll have like 10 minutes in this breakout room, roughly 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah, so somebody in your breakout group can take on the role of informal timekeeper, just to keep a check that, because these conversations can open up, and obviously you can get into problem solving and all sorts of things. So it's not a problem solving conversation, not about solutions or the future. But as Michaela said, just a couple of minutes per person. So we're going to split you into breakout groups. We've got 31 people on the call, so I think we'll go for 6 breakout groups. And I am going to do that. I'll stop sharing my screen so people got the questions. If you need to do a quick screenshot, or if you want to write the questions down, please feel free. Before I stop sharing the screen. So whilst you do that, I'm going to repeat, what are you experiencing? What are you noticing in your own self? And this is your opportunity to share. 2 to 3 minutes each.
Okay, here we go. So most of you have probably used breakout rooms before. If you haven't, I'm going to click the button in a minute to say create the breakout rooms. You'll then get an invitation to accept to join the breakout room. So click the button to accept joining the breakout room. Once you're in the room, a very quick introduction to who you are, where you are, and then feel free to share a bit of what's your current reality in terms of what are you experiencing. If for any reason Zoom kicks you out of the room, which sometimes does happen, then you should have the option to rejoin the room. If you can't work out how to do that, then one of us will end up back in the main session with you and we'll have a conversation there with you. But please accept your invitation to join the breakout room. Okay, so I'm going to split you into the rooms now and we'll have a good conversation for about 10 to 12 minutes. Feel free to just to start writing in the chat, just the sort of things you were either hearing or what you were saying. What were some of the themes and things you were hearing or saying? Okay, so I think that's probably most people coming back in. Okay, so hopefully you had a good conversation. I'd be interested, feel free to share in the chat the themes or the kind of things you were hearing people saying in terms of what are people noticing in themselves in terms of thoughts, feelings, emotions. Feel free to just write anything in the chat you feel comfortable sharing. I'd be interested to start to see what sort of themes and things we're seeing. Okay, thanks, Sam, about being more mindful. Michaela, can I just check as people are writing, is it still recording? Because I paused the recording whilst we had the breakout session.
Is it still recording?
I have a recording icon in the top left, Michaela.
Okay, so
Mine's recording. Yeah, it's recording.
Okay, just to check. Yeah, I just paused it and I thought I'd restarted it.
Yeah, it's recording.
Great, thanks. Seema, thanks. Yes, Seema's talking about being more calm. Great. You thought someone there, Subhash, thought they had more time, but there's so much more to do with new ideas, short of time. Yeah, that's certainly a theme, I think, in terms of what people are experiencing. Okay, you heard that in Iceland, people have come together, a sense of togetherness, yeah. Yeah, time to think. That's right, Gemma, yeah. Yeah, that's a great one, Stacey. Awareness of the strong disconnect between the haves and the have-nots. Yeah, I think it's probably highlighting some of society's reality, certainly. Yeah, enjoying the little things. Thanks, Sonia. Hard to concentrate. Yeah, that's certainly a common one. Yeah, and uncertainty certainly comes up a lot. Okay, so well, a couple of reasons I invited you to take part in that little exercise is that one of the things that can happen when we're in high uncertainty is we want to know what's going to happen. You know, anxiety and stress comes from uncertainty, therefore we want some certainty. And the reality is at the moment, we kind of don't know, you know, we don't know. So what we can do is we can check in with people what they are experiencing, and that helps us connect. And the big thing is when we do it with our clients or with our employees, if you're running a business, is that it will help you connect, but it will also help you shape how you adapt and respond as we go through this, because if you can understand people's reality, then you're much better placed to then shape what the future might look like, because what you've got is data, you've got information, you've got an understanding, you've got empathy. So if you're in a client facing role, then, and I'm doing this, I'm doing free, what I just did there with you guys, I'm doing that for free with lots of different people, with clients and things. So it's really interesting to hear what people are experiencing, because it helps them work out what's going on. One of the questions that people will often ask in high uncertainty situations is, what do you need? And it's a really difficult question to answer, because the obvious answer is, I need certainty. Well, we can't have lots of certainty, but the question we can ask is, what are you experiencing? So if you're leading a business, if you've got a team, one of the things I would encourage you to do is to do a very simple check-in like that, and to find out and give people an opportunity to share what their current reality is. I really encourage you to do that. It'll deeply connect you with clients and employees. There's lots of things written around psychology and behavior about the ultimate thing that helps people connect is when we share suffering. And I know that is a big statement, sharing suffering, and there's lots written about it. And ultimately, many people are in that situation at the moment, but there's often strength with adversity, and connection comes from a lot of adversity. A guy I used to work with, when we were running corporate programs, we'd run these big group programs, and we'd all be told, the questions we should ask at the same time and everything. And this guy would always do his own thing. And his small group introduction, when we ran the leadership programs, he didn't do, what's your name, where you're from, what's your job, what have you achieved? The question he always asked was, what are you suffering? And that's how he started his leadership small group programs. And the acceleration of the relationships in his group was far better than anyone else that I ever worked with. And of course, he had a real skill in asking the question. It wasn't quite as blunt as that, but there's something about sharing, being real and being human, which really connects us and makes us feel more secure, sense of belonging, being involved, being valued. So whilst we might be focused on wanting to know the future, it's very difficult, but what we can do is we can help people connect with the present and feel supported through that. So building on that, and a big part of it is our mindset, which is about how we're responding to adversity. And I think, I'm really aware of my own mindset at the moment about what's going on, and some of my own experiences that I can use as a metaphor and analogy is when I've spent time in the wilderness and in the Arctic. And it's a little bit similar to this, is if you're on an expedition in the Arctic and you're dragging your sledge with all your provisions in, there's lots of discomfort, there's lots of hardship, there's uncertainty. Is there a polar bear around the corner? Is there a crevasse I'm going to fall in? And this actually, it feels a little bit like being on an Arctic expedition in terms of the dynamics and some of the themes and what we're experiencing. And connection with people is a huge thing with this in terms of trust and relationships and understanding how people are. And I think it feels very relatable to me. There's some great examples from history of people dealing with adversity, and I'm a huge fan of the Arctic and Arctic exploration. So one story was a chap called William Parry, who was a British explorer, and in 1819 they were looking for a route through the Northwest Passage above northern Canada, and they set off on a boat, and they got stuck in the sea ice, and they planned to, they had provisions to overwinter, stuck in the sea ice on a boat like this. Wasn't their boat, by the way. This is a boat up in Svalbard in Norway that used to be a hotel that they froze into the sea ice, and you could use this to stay on. Their boat was much older than this, and they got stuck in the sea ice. So what do you do if you're on a boat and you're stuck in the sea ice for the whole Arctic winter? You've got 3 months of complete darkness. It's minus 50 degrees Celsius, which is similar in Fahrenheit, and you're stuck there on a boat. What do you do? How do you deal with that uncertainty, that discomfort, that hardship, and what mindset do you employ? And they did some extraordinary things. There's some great writing about this. If you want to read about it, William Parry, 1820, and they did all sorts of things. They had the crew write a daily newspaper. They did plays. They had all sorts of strange things. They described having fun in 3 months of complete darkness and minus 50. And eventually they did get back to England the following October. So they had about 18 months on this journey, including having an overwinter in the sea ice. But in terms of mindset and the things they did, it's a really interesting study of what happens when you're experiencing discomfort and hardship and uncertainty. Another story is another Arctic story. Is there was a boat called the Polaris about 60 years later, 1882, and they were crossing the Atlantic. They hit an iceberg a little time before the Titanic did, and there was 19 survivors on this from this boat, and they ended up on an iceberg. This story is hard to believe, but it is true. They ended up on an iceberg, including small children, and they drifted for 6 months on an iceberg, having been shipwrecked. And in late April 1883, they ended up in Hudson Bay and were found by some local whalers. There's a whaling station there. And the first thing that the whalers asked these 19 people, who all survived, including the children on this iceberg, the first question the whalers asked were, "Have you spent the night on the iceberg?" And they erupted into laughter and said it was the first time they'd laughed in 6 months. And they said, actually, no, we've been on the iceberg for 6 months, drifting 3,000 kilometers. And they all survived. I mean, extraordinary levels of uncertainty, difficulty, adversity. But it is amazing what we as humans, what we are capable of getting through with connection, with belief, and with the right mindset. And certainly from spending time on boats myself and in the Arctic, there's one of the things I've learned is that there's a phrase with sailing boats that a busy ship is a happy ship. And I think it's something that applies now is if you're in an organization, if you're in a team, is having engagement, having things to do that feels like it's helpful to what the purpose is. I mean, and the purpose of being stuck on an iceberg is basic survival. I mean, it's very obvious. So finding purpose, whilst it might sound unusual, finding purpose if you're stuck in the ice on a boat or if you're on an iceberg is actually quite difficult because it's just basically about survival. So whatever you do during the day that's leading towards that, then that's it's fairly straightforward. But I think there's a lot we can learn in terms of mindset and being busy, keeping engaged, and whatever it is we're doing, that it feels like it's connected to something that engages with us. So one of my questions would be, what do you feel like you are doing or you could be doing that's keeping you on some sort of track whilst the future is uncertain? If you think about things on a day-to-day level, what are some of the things that you can be doing that are engaging, that are keeping you and the people you work with, depending on the situation you're in, that's actually keeping you on track to some level of purpose? There's the book by Jim Collins, Good to Great. I'm sure some of you will have read this. In terms of mindset, this is quite interesting. There's something he studied from a Vietnam War. During the Vietnam War, there was an American guy, I think he was a sailor or an airman, and he is called James Stockdale, and he was put in prison in Vietnam for about 6 years. And Jim Collins interviewed him afterwards and started to talk to him about the mindset of being in difficulty and high uncertainty situations. And Jim Collins developed this thing called the Stockdale paradox. And what he discovered was that the relationship between success, getting through high uncertainty, and your mindset and your optimism was related. And Jim Collins, in his book Good to Great, goes on to study lots of organizations about their ability to get through difficulty. And what they found was that if you're in high uncertainty and high difficulty, if you go into defeatism and despair very quickly, then your chance of success is quite low. So if the people on the iceberg just thought, how on earth are we going to survive being on an iceberg for 6 months? The likelihood is they probably wouldn't have tried to go fishing, they probably wouldn't have tried to build igloos, and most of them would have died. If they'd been overly optimistic to the point of delusion, where they were saying every 2 days, oh, we're going to get rescued tomorrow, we'll get rescued tomorrow. Jim Collins' research with organizations and from talking to James Stockdale in Vietnam was the same thing happened in terms of the likelihood of success. So there is a direct relationship based on certainly this research between realistic optimism and the chance of success. And again, Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, and you can Google the Stockdale paradox, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned in terms of our current situation there. And this was James Stockdale's own quote on the matter. So I'll just give you a second to read that. So there's that combination of accepting the current reality, and you're not in a position of denial, delusion, or defeatism. It's just acceptance. And some might say this is classic Stoicism. So anyway, any of you who are interested in ancient philosophy, Stoicism is really what is required at the moment. And the classic tenet of Stoicism was that you started every day with accepting what the reality was, and then thinking, how are you going to function and how are you going to get through the day, and being positive about it, but not overly optimistic. So really, in terms of our mindset at the moment, is a place of realistic optimism in order to get the best chance of success. So one of the things I would ask you is, where do you think you are in terms of your optimism? And what could you do to have that realistic optimism with acceptance of what we have? And what might you do to have that healthy level of optimism in terms of your connection and how you're working and relating to people, the conversations you're having? And it's something to be really aware of. And if you're feeling in despair, who can you talk to feel slightly more optimistic? And if you're hearing from people that everything's going to be fine, then what kind of conversation might you have with them? So as a question for you, where do you think you are on the graph, and what might you do depending on where you might flow? And you're not always going to stay in the same place with this. I know certainly myself, I've certainly had moments where I'm just thinking, I can't see how I'm going to get any more work. I don't, if this carries on for 2 years, I don't know. And then I'm swaying, and I think that's completely normal. But it's more about our awareness of where we are and what we can then do when we're in a certain position on that graph. Probably one of the most startling examples of mindset in high uncertainty and high adversity is the case of Viktor Frankl, who was a World War II war prisoner in Auschwitz. And he wrote an incredible book. It's a fairly short book called Man's Search for Meaning. If you're interested in perspective and lessons, then this book could be something interesting to read during the current situation. So Viktor Frankl was a psychologist and invented an area of psychology called, I think it's logotherapy. And Viktor Frankl lost most of his family to the gas chambers in the concentration camp. Had horrific things done to himself and his family, horrific conditions. I mean, you probably can't get anything worse and survive. And his conclusion was this, which I find quite extraordinary. This was his conclusion to high adversity. And what he basically said was that regardless of the physical things and the environment that the German camp officers put him in, the one thing they couldn't do was decide how he should choose to respond. So in terms of mindset, it's really interesting to think and being aware of how are we responding. And when you combine this with the other example of the Stockdale paradox, it's being aware of what our response is and how useful and how helpful is it. So again, if you want to have you don't have to read the book, but there's some really good summaries online if you Google Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, to help you to think about how you cope in these high adverse situations. So where's your attention at the moment in terms of what's going on, in terms of how we are dealing with this adversity? This is a very simple model, and something, feel free to take a screenshot of this. And again, there's examples of this online. Is when you were in your breakout groups and you're having a conversation about what are you experiencing, if you were to spend a little bit more time doing that on your own, and I would encourage you to do this after the call sometime in the next few days, is to write down a list of everything you're experiencing or feeling or sensing or noticing, and then put one of these words or put those words into one of these three categories. So is the thing you're experiencing something you're concerned about? Is it something you can influence, or is it something you can control? And what often happens when we're in high adversity and high difficult situations is lots of the things that are on our mind that are causing us anxiety and stress and difficulty are the things that we're concerned about, but actually we can't do anything about it. So the things that we should focus on really are the things we can control and influence. So You know, if I was going to give you a personal example, I've got a concern that in the next 18 months, there might not be any face-to-face work for me in the outdoors, working with clients, working with groups, and that is a concern. I could spend every day ruminating on that, going round and round and round, and actually I can do very little about it. But what I can influence in the short term is to think, how can I bring some of the lessons I've got and what I've learned from working with people, how can I do that online so I can still connect with people, I can still work with people. It's not my first preference doing it online, but it's something I can influence and I can do. So it's about how can we think about the things that we can directly control. Things like, you know, our health, our diet, our exercise are absolutely within our control. So in terms of an exercise to do after the call is have a think about where your attention is and what are you experiencing, and is it things you can control and influence? How can you spend more time in control and influence to help you through this time of adversity? So purpose is a huge subject. You might think, you know, do you have a purpose at the moment? You know, you might be asking yourself that question. What's the, you know, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? There's all this, you know, it's an interesting time to think about the concept of purpose. And purpose doesn't have to be necessarily some huge world-changing thing. Purpose can be very simple. Purpose can be as simple as, what do I need to do today so my family get really good quality, healthy food? You know, that could be a purpose for today, the reason you're doing something. And there's lots of definitions of purpose and interpretations of it. Sitting still with a blank flip chart or a blank PowerPoint screen thinking, okay, I need to come up with a purpose. Okay, it's fairly unrealistic. It's quite a difficult thing to do. It's a little bit like being in a meeting with a blank flip chart and somebody says, okay, everyone, let's get creative and innovate. And everybody sits there and looks at each other and is like, well, how do you do that cold? You know, how do you innovate and create without some kind of impetus? So often purpose is the result of some behavior, which, you know, is a result of the environment you're in, as opposed to seeking purpose for purpose sake. So trying to seek it can feel unnatural and often disappointing and forced. But thinking about what's important to you and using, there's lots of diagrams out there, but this particular one is from a Japanese philosophy called Ikigai, which is the word in the middle, Ikigai. And again, if you've not seen this, something you can Google. You might want to spend some time with an exercise like this over the next few weeks. And this might help you think, what is it you're doing that gives you some kind of grounding and belonging? And Ikigai is it doesn't really have a direct translation into English, but it's around the pursuit of a happier, more fulfilling life is the loose definition. So you can Google Ikigai. Simplified in 2 key questions. I quite like these 2 questions, and this is my interpretation of that, is what does the world need and what matters to you? So one of the easiest ways, I think, for finding some kind of purpose in any situation is to think about what really matters to you in terms of your values, what's important to you, and combining that with what does the world need. And certainly a lot of my work that I've done, I've gone through this very simplified exercise, like what do I care about and what does the world need? And I'll do something in the junction of those two questions. And that can, and even in the current climate, that can be an exercise in terms of, you know, what matters to me, what does the world need? You could say what matters to me is the health of my family. What does the world need? It needs less people in the hospital, so the hospital system isn't overloaded. Okay, what do I need to do to bring those 2 things together? You know, that's at a very, very simple level. You could scale this all the way up to your business in terms of, you know, why does your, you know, in terms of the reason your business exists, what matters to the business, what matters to its people, and what does the world need? And when you combine those 2 things, you can then really start to shape the reason that something exists. So again, it's an exercise, or you know, another exercise that you could do to help you through this time. In terms of the question, what matters to you? This really is about values. So again, in the chat, I'd love you to feel free in the chat. How would you answer that single question? Like what really matters to you? So feel free, type away in the chat there in terms of your values. If you've ever done a values exercise before, you know, what would you say your values are? And if you haven't, maybe just answer the question, what really matters to you? be interesting to see what you say. Okay, we've got integrity, people, family, happiness. Yeah. A level playing ground, yeah. So we've got something about fairness in there, health. Yeah, values in terms of keeping people on board, being honest and transparent, peaceful, optimistic. Safety of family, yeah. Okay, yeah, so some great themes in there about family, health. Now, one of the interesting things about doing an exercise like this is, of course, in the current climate, there's going to be some real clear themes in terms of health and family. When I do these exercises with groups, with clients, you know, there's usually some reasonable commonality. And what's interesting is when you start to ask people about their values, is having knowledge of your values and what matters to you can give you a real strong grounding and sense of purpose if you're having an opportunity to live to them. And one of the reasons a lot of organizations struggle is because the organizational values often don't match the values of their employees. One of the things I've been encouraging organizations to do in the last 6 months is to get the senior leaders, the chief exec and the top team, is rather than having their bio on the website that says all the things they've achieved, is just to start with their values and to start with what they care about, because that's really what most people, they want to work in an organization where they feel that their values are aligned, as well as making a living and having a good livelihood. And I think, you know, not that I want to get into too much forecasting and prediction, but I think based on people's experiences through coronavirus, I think when we come through this, I think more people are going to want their workplaces to have far more connection with values, with society. And I think there'll be, you know, I think, you know, there's for years, and certainly for years, I've done work with organizations trying to help, you know, merge performance with profit with purpose and bigger, wide societal purpose. And I think coming out of this, there'll be a bigger focus on that in terms of aligning really meaningful values with the work that people are doing, regardless of the industry it's in. And I think that's what people are going to look for. They're going to look for deeper connection and escapism, of course. Absolutely going to look for escapism after this, but also I think there's going to be slightly more need for more connection at a values level. In terms of opportunities, a couple of talked about opportunities in the chat in terms of opportunities for learning and deep different connections. I think there's opportunities for innovation, for creation, discovery, different kind of leadership, for slowing down. And my own experiences of the work I do typically, well, what's been really interesting for me is a lot of the work I do with executives, with corporates, is to take them into nature and to help them slow down, because we often operate really fast through life and we don't have time to slow down and think. Where really what we're in at the moment, for a lot of people, not everybody, but for a lot of people, we're in an enforced slowdown. It's like an enforced reflective time. And that's quite unusual for many of us. And but it's one of the pieces of work I do quite a bit of. And this is a venue I use near where I live here in the north of England, and to take people into these environments to help them to slow down. And that can be around developing what you might call your inner game. And there's a guy called Kevin Cashman, who's written some really interesting stuff about the study of our inner game. And that's about being, you know, confronted with ourselves, holding the mirror up and asking ourselves some really profound questions around, you know, who are we, where are we going, why are we doing that? And really we have the opportunity, and if anything right now, we actually have, from, again, not for everybody, but for many of us, we've got the world's biggest commodity in abundance, which is time. And very rarely do we have time. And it's the world's greatest luxury, is to have the time to think about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So certainly one of the things we can do is to develop more perspective, insight, awareness of ourselves, and to be in a far more grounded position personally with a bit of reflection. And that obviously comes with a balance, is we don't want to spend all day, every day reflecting. And a big part of this in terms of reflective work is about perspective. It really is an opportunity for that. And again, in terms of some of the work I do is taking people out for the simplicity of a walk in nature to have a really, really good quality conversation and to have some discovery and raise an awareness. I'll skip that one just based on the time. In terms of leading through adversity, I found this picture when I was looking through some photographs to put on this in this workshop, and this made me smile because it made me think a little bit about leadership at the moment, and the birds coming into land, and it's up there above everybody, but you know quite what's going to happen as it gets in there with everybody looking around in different directions. There's certainly a leadership challenge at the moment, and that leadership might be leading ourselves, might be leading our families, might be leading our organizations. And leadership doesn't necessarily have to come from the person who's the boss. So with these suggestions in terms of, you know, how do you create a culture where people feel more secure, feel connected and safe to experiment and feel less isolated? I think not just senior leaders, but anybody in an organization can do this in terms of acts of leadership, is to ask more questions, to do more listening, be more empathetic, seek to understand and check in. And I think they are the things that are going to help create the cultures as we go through this, that are going to help people get through it, both personally as families and as businesses. And I think, you know, I think we often don't do enough of this. And I think one of my hopes is as we come through this is that the behaviors that are required to get through this then carry on afterwards. And I'd love to see that happen in terms of just how we engage with people. You know, I remember I was running a conference a couple of years ago, and I was last in the queue at the buffet, and I said to the person serving the food, I said, "Oh, you know, how's your day?" And this young lady said to me, "Thank you for asking. You're the first person who spoke to me like a real human." You know, and we often just don't do that. We don't give people the time to just ask a question and listen and be empathetic. And one of my hopes coming through this is that we're just like that. Our appreciation for people in the service industry, I think, will change. And so whether it's the person in the supermarket, driving the bus, whatever it is, that I think we become more appreciative of people who are you know, basically at the moment are keeping us well and safe. So just to wrap up, the last thing I would say about coping with anxiety, in adversity and dealing with uncertainty is what's the role of kindness? And I think kindness is massively underestimated. When we are feeling vulnerable and we are feeling in positions of uncertainty, we often are looking to what we can get. And that is quite normal. It's because we feel threatened, we have fear, we feel vulnerable. Well, what can I get? What can I get to make me feel better? And I would suggest turning that on its head, and rather than asking what can you get, I would say what can you give? Because my experience of kindness and giving, especially unconditionally, without seeking reward, is that humans are hardwired to reciprocate, and some of the best opportunities and things that happen come as a result of unconditional giving and unconditional kindness. So that can be, you know, it can be your time, it can be your skills, it can be a conversation, it can be a smile, it could be, you know, financial, depending on your position. So I would ask you to think about, you know, what can you give rather than what can you get? Because amazing things come back. We're hardwired to reciprocate in terms of that feeling of being valued and the act of giving and what that feels like to receive genuine kindness from someone. And I chose this photograph. I'll close with a story in terms of unconditional kindness. As I was at a conference a few years ago, probably 6 years ago now, and there was a very well-known British entrepreneur from the television was doing the after-dinner talk. And I heard him talking to someone about a project he was doing, and he was having difficulty. And when I heard this, I knew someone that could help him. And as he walked out of the conference, I went up to him and I said, I'm happy to introduce you to someone that could help you. And he gave me his business card. He said, "Thank you very much." And I emailed him. I didn't hear anything for about 3 months. And then I got an email out of the blue and he said, "Scotty, thanks so much for your offer of help. The project isn't happening now, but I'd like to buy you I'd like to buy you a coffee anyway. So I met him in London for a coffee. We ended up talking about work and various things. And then about 3 months later, I got a phone call out of the blue. And he said, Scotty, you do coaching work and behavioral development? And I said, yeah. He said, my yacht is in Tahiti. How about you come sailing for a month on my yacht, and we can chat about philosophy and helping me out. And so as a result of a little bit of unconditional kindness with no agenda, I ended up having a month sailing around Tahiti on this guy's yacht, and we've ended up becoming really good friends. He's a business mentor to me. And, you know, it's amazing what happens when we just step into something unconditionally and are prepared to offer help. As long as you don't do it seeking something, because then that becomes slightly narcissistic, where you're only offering help because you want something in return. And we're quite good at sniffing that one out. We can sense that one quite quickly. So that's what I'd like you to leave you with is don't underestimate the power of unconditional kindness, and especially now in terms of requiring connection and coping with this adversity. Any questions? Thank you. What questions do you have?
If no one has one, I've got one, but I'll let everyone think first rather than me jumping in. You can post it on the chat if you want, and I can ask it on your behalf, or you can just put it on the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask the question yourself. Shall I go?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Michaela.
It's quite controversial, and I think you're going to then say, I can't believe she's asking this after at the end of this whole. Do we need to have a sense of purpose? Why would anyone need a sense of purpose?
Yeah, it is a good question, and there's lots written about it. I think, why do we need a sense of purpose? Why bother? Well, I think it depends very much on the individual. I think some people can go through life very happily and not be aware of a sense of purpose, but what they're actually doing, and people I know, they're actually living by a set of very clear values and principles, and they live by them, but they would never describe it as a purpose. They've never sat and done a purpose exercise per se, but they know what's important to them. And as I was saying earlier, it's not having the purpose headline that matters. And I think that's where organizations come unstuck, as they come up, you know, they engineer some marketing headline as a purpose, but actually it doesn't mean anything. It's meaningless. So it's the actions, and it's the environment, and it's the day-to-day practice of working within a system and environment, or with people where you feel like you are connected, that I think can give you a sense of purpose. Then you can also get into the definitions of what's the difference between purpose and meaning, and people use the words interchangeably quite a lot. There's one thing I've read where they talk about purpose being more of the what and the how, and meaning is the why, and purpose is there to support meaning. So meaning can often feel more of the why, far more reflective and much more profound, and purpose can often, purpose can be just what you're doing and how you're doing it. So there's different interpretations, and I think, so for me, I would say, if people feel like they need attachment and clarity for something, then having a purpose or having something to aim for can be useful. And if people are really sure what their values are and they're really clear about that, and they're just doing that in isolation, then that's great as well. And you don't necessarily need the purpose, the purpose label. But I think in the current climate, purpose could be useful because it can perhaps answer some of the why questions, even at a really simplistic level.
Some people might actually not realize that they know inside themselves they do have a purpose, but they've actually never actually said it out loud. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, they've never said it. I mean, there's a values exercise that you can do where you get a big list of values and you tick all the values, and then you go through a prioritization exercise, and then you construct a paragraph and then a sentence, and ultimately that is, it's about who you are and your identity. So yeah, there's different ways of doing it.
I think we've got a few people here saying a mixture of statements and is there a question? I'll just read it out. Loveline says, it is common to be more reflective, optimistic, stoic in times like these, and then lose the edge when things are normal. And how do you hold on to this feeling of new purpose? That was from Loveline.
Lovely. Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I say, we're in this sort of enforced reflective times, and it requires stoicism, and it requires requires being realistically optimistic, or pragmatic optimism. Pragmatic optimism is what Jim Collins called it. There's a possibility of losing the edge. I mean, what I would say is, whatever the habits are that you think are positive habits that you have at the moment or going through this, then it's how do you carry on doing them? And certainly, we're not often aware of our bad habits, but positive habits that serve us and that help us can be reinforced through daily practice, through journaling. I think that the power of the pen is massively underestimated in terms of writing and journaling. So if people are developing new habits that are working for them during this time, I think writing it down and then writing how it's working for people can be one way of holding on to it. And having if reflection is helping people, or practice and stoicism is helping, is putting that in the diary, perhaps, is actually having that as a part of your daily work or weekly work, whatever works for people. I'm going to spend an hour this week doing some reflecting, and if it's a year's time, is to have the practice of doing it, just putting it as part of the way that you operate.
There are a few more questions, but also I'm very conscious of time. So I think, because we're already an hour and a quarter, and I just don't want to lose a lot of people.
Yeah.
So do you think, Scotty, you can answer some of these questions maybe offline or on our community? For everyone, Scotty is actually on our community. You can email him and he's made free some time for you. But just very conscious that a few people are actually leaving. So one more question maybe?
Yeah, well, just to follow up on that, Michaela, my email address is on there, and my website's the same domain. So feel free to drop me an email. Happy to chat. I've got plenty of time on my hands, and it'd be great to chat to people, and happy to help in whatever way I can. So please feel free to drop me a line.
Yeah, so I think we're going to leave it to this. I must say it's been so insightful. Thank you so much, Scotty, for this invaluable insight, and also for bringing the connections meaning so much to life, and really putting it into a different perspective with a different set of events, but actually being so at the heart of what people should do, turning to one another and sharing their pain, really, because the more l'unità fa la forza, as we say in Italy, and I think that the unity makes us stronger. The more people makes us stronger. United, we can conquer, basically. So I certainly thought connections being really powerful in this instance, and now even more so. So it was very insightful for me personally, and I'm sure many people have found this the same. So thank you for everyone for being here and listening and contributing. We'll be sharing this recording out, so if you feel that this may be useful for someone else, you feel free to forward it on. Scotty has graciously agreed to open up some of his time. You can contact him via the email, but you can also contact him within our Connections community. There's an easy button to actually talk to Scotty. Our next webinar will look at well-being, and that will be on the 6th of May. And it'll be another hands-on workshop. And also we're going to be looking at sustainability on the 12th of May. So in the meantime, if those of you who are part of the Connections online community, I hope you're enjoying the new features. We're introducing new features every time, and we're really excited to be sharing you these new features every week. for those of you new to the connections, please let us know if you're interested in joining, and I'll be very happy to talk to you. And that's just left to say, let us know if we can help in any way, shape or form. If you can think of any webinars that we can actually do, or talks, or bringing people together in any way, shape or form, any ideas that you may have, please talk to us, and we'll definitely be hearing it out and seeing if that can become a viable way forward. Oh, and one more thing, actually, Gemma has introduced through her acquaintances a class every Wednesday for us to actually keep fit, and I'm definitely there, and I'm doing that every day at 5:30 p.m. London time. So if you want to join that, I'll be distributing details of this class as well. So wishing you all a happy and healthy rest of the week, and speak to you soon. Bye bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers now. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Cheers.
Thank you.